You're all very welcome to this Law Society Practice Information session. I'm joined today by Tanya Moeller, who's Vice Chair of the Technology Committee, and today we're going to be discussing what's important for practitioners' cybersecurity. So, Tanya, you're very welcome. I know this has come on the back of a range of articles that were written in the Gazette over the last couple of months. So you're very welcome. I know you want to just talk about just the sensitivity of the subject matter itself just a little bit at the start. You know, this is a sensitive area for all businesses and all industries. And so whilst we don't want to frighten anyone, we just want everyone to sort of take seriously what the information that's publicly available out there at the moment.
That's right. And I think that's one of the reasons as well why the Law Society was very keen that the Technology Committee would support the members in relation to issuing the range of articles that are currently, well, they're not quite finished, but, you know, largely finished. The Gazette was very good for hosting 6 articles in a long series. So, of course, also the Gazette understood that that was something that the members could easily be reached on. I think because of the very public attack on the HSE and generally also with working from home during COVID, everybody was a little bit aware that this is something that they should maybe look into, and also from a professional indemnity insurance, we get more questions on how does cybersecurity impact us and what should we do as practice owners. And we felt that the series of articles would be good. I should say, by way of a disclaimer, I co-authored them with a number of other authors, and I'm definitely not a subject matter expert, even though I appear today as a subject matter expert. But I'm not, how should I say, I'm not a cybersecurity specialist. And I think it is important to draw the distinction between lawyers like me who are dealing with cybersecurity legal terms every day and deal with data security contracts and IT contracts every day, and would know the subject matter as lawyers, and real experts, so to speak, who would be IT trained and could do things like network resilience testing and virus scanning and things like that. So obviously there's the difference between the two professions.
So I think the purpose of today is to sort of review the 4 articles that are available on the Gazette.ie website, and just discuss through each of the issues that sort of came out. So the first article was sort of attack mode, as it was titled in that Gazette article, and it sort of was trying to look at the first line of defense. So do you want to just talk about that a little bit, of what sort of the sentiment behind, like, for somebody who's coming at this, knows it's an issue, knows it's a threat, but hasn't, trying to find it hard to organize their thoughts as to what the different steps that one might take. So
yes,
I think the first thing you started with was if it doesn't feel right.
100%. So I think it's obviously very difficult to comprise the whole topics into a very short article, but there are technical measures and there are organizational measures. And in the industry themselves, it seems that organizational and staff behavior remains to be a key vulnerability. So practice managers are really encouraged to set a little bit of time aside, in line also with the approach around cybersecurity risk assessment and professional indemnity insurance, which we can talk about later because it's covered in other articles. But really look down and look at their practice holistically and think, right, how am I currently being set up? What is my technical network and my hardware and my software that I use? Which vendors do I work with? And then there are organizational measures such as staff training. And the first article was really around raising awareness, making clear that in terms of staff, common threats are not impossible to detect. So they could be a ransomware email where I get an email from Justin Purcell at lawsociety.ie, and maybe the L in law is maybe a number 1 rather than an L, and I think it's Law Society, but it actually says 1A Society, and I don't see the spelling mistake, but that one spelling mistake could show you that the sender is perhaps not genuine. So some of these threatening emails and threats out there are not as frightening and difficult to see as perhaps one might think. So we were trying to make the whole topic a little bit approachable. as a set towards the other articles.
Yeah. And one thing that kind of highlighted me or jumped out at me was human error is very high in allowing cyber attacks, and then training was really high in trying to prevent attacks. So do you have any suggestions, practical suggestions as to how training should be conducted or put together for staff, and for what staff, and or is it for everybody?
Yes, I mean, there are trainers available, but I think it's also when you look online, you can find common examples of recent, for example, ransomware emails, which then are being clicked, and then the attachment is being clicked, and then perhaps you can release Trojan or something else. It is also being aware of the more organizational things. So, for example, we cited the example of LinkedIn, people contacting you on LinkedIn and making clear that you are interesting for them by way of potentially an instruction. You then engage with them, then they send you an email, then you click on the email, and then it turns out the email actually contains ransomware. So, these type of or more modern forms of types of manipulations are also out there in terms of social engineering. And as you can imagine, this type of social engineering is not dependent on a spelling mistake. It's just literally the wrong people approaching you and sounding genuine.
Yeah. So I think that the purpose of trying to highlight human error and getting some training was trying to change people's behavior and how they look at emails coming in or different types of attacks. I suppose there is a checklist on that first article, which is in June 2023. I'll put up a link to it in a few minutes, but they're on the Gazette. But one was around the dangers of open Wi-Fi or public Wi-Fi for sending sensitive information. Do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, so in terms of public Wi-Fi, so it's really asking the W questions. What am I doing, when, where, and what setting, and over which connections? So the challenge with public Wi-Fi is that if you're a laptop, if you have a laptop and you're in that area and you are transmitting sensitive information, such as maybe bank details, across this public information, then depending on your own email security, this may or may not be visible. So I think as part of the evaluation of the practice as a whole, what we wanted to do with the first article is basically give a little bit of first line thoughts, such as, be aware in terms of some Wi-Fi is not safe. Handle portable devices carefully, and use a privacy screen. These are things that are relatively low-hanging fruit that don't cost a lot of money, but they can all be gathered together and be put together into a format of how staff can be trained. So and it always have to cost an arm and a leg. So this is also what we were trying to explain.
Yeah, some of it's just practical stuff that you can pick up along the way. And there is a cybersecurity hub on the Law Society website, which I'll share a link now as well. So that has some good practical suggestions. I suppose then moving on to the second article, unless you had anything further to add on the first, because there's a natural...
Just maybe one thing, I mean, in terms of the checks, if you are working with an IT security professional or any IT professional who supports your practice, even if they do it only, every half a year or a year, depending on your own budget and your interactions with them, perhaps ask them to give you a checklist like this. So, perhaps replicate a little bit of what's in the article and say, well, can you give us some low-hanging fruit that don't cost a lot of money, that we don't have to, really cause a lot of havoc in terms of our operational day-to-day in the office, but are simple takeaways for staff so that we can make some of our organizational behavior easier and safer.
Very good. So then in the second article, you started stress testing and looking at exactly the services or not that you had in place or protections in place for preventing of cybersecurity. And one of them we've just talked about, which is Wi-Fi. But the other one then is when you're on the road, and I think you made some little reference to it there, but downloading more mobile-friendly versions of products, etc. Do you want to make a comment on that?
Yes.
And then maybe as a follow-on, the sharing of devices in the office.
Yeah. So I think with COVID, everybody was working from home. They took their devices with them everywhere. We mentioned things like privacy screens, which are very easy to glue onto your laptop screen so that people at an angle cannot see what you're doing. I think they cost like 10 or 15 euro or something, but they're very, very worth it. Then in terms of public Wi-Fi, I did allude to the fact that it might not be safe, but it is possible to install a VPN, so a virtual private network that makes your connection to the internet safe. So it's a little bit like a tunnel that an outsider cannot get into when you're sending data packages across the internet to the recipient. I also wanted to indicate in relation to this by sharing Microsoft Word and other types of software that lawyers use a lot have, of course, online versions. And if you share these, you need to make sure that it in a cloud-based environment, if you allow staff to access these, that they are obviously doing that in a safe manner, that if staff are exited, that the access is controlled. And in terms of the devices, you then have the old challenge between, do you allow staff to access such material on their personal devices, or do you issue them with mobile from the business that may be remotely controlled through an information management system, whereby you can then wipe the information from the mobile as soon as the staff member leaves. So these are all concerns around how do I actually manage the day-to-day access and sharing of information, making sure that staff maybe do not use unauthorized providers like Gmail, for example, when you're supposed to use Outlook and things like this.
And so part of that article, then you also discussed sort of firewalls, encryption, and viruses, and how you might deal with them. So they're where the office itself is being attacked and some of the protections available. Do you want to make a...
That's right. I mean, I'm trying to basically demystify some of these concepts a little bit. And of course, there are only like a couple of concepts in a myriad of IT lingo.
Yeah.
But these are sort of standard technical. So Article 2 is all about technical defenses, and these are standard technical defenses to make sure that when you go online, for example, over lunchtime, and you open a certain type of website that perhaps may not be that safe, that you're protected automatically on an IT level. So, emails are scanned for bad attachments so that hopefully they get filtered out before you even get a chance to click on a wrong attachment and things like this. So if you want to do this yourself, there are antivirus firewall providers that you can install on your laptop yourself, and they are good, and you can update them regularly. They don't cost an arm and a leg. And then you can also get your IT professional to advise you and just say, look, because you have X amount of staff members, it might be cheaper if you get a package of X, Y, and Z, and then he installs it for you. And it's, of course, important that you have the latest updates, so that the latest threats are being caught by the latest software.
Very good. And I suppose as a final part of that article, and talking about third-party providers or people or consultants to you, the idea of doing a risk assessment, how important do you think it is for each practice to do a risk assessment?
Yes, and I think that is a slightly more complex and slightly more scary idea, but it's actually hopefully a little bit tangible. We tried to get Connor and BSI to give a bit of a breakdown what a risk assessment is, but it basically is a little bit like a fire assessment or a health and safety assessment. You go and walk the office physically, but also obviously in your own head, where and when do my staff members work, and what devices and what way. For example, do they share documents online, and if not, they use USB sticks that could be lost. So there's a question around what is the way that I work, and how does that way of working cause what particular types of risks in this environment. It's hard to do it if you're new to the topic. So sometimes it is, of course, recommended that you have a professional carry out a risk assessment like this. If you do it yourself, it is not impossible to do. If you perhaps follow some of the blueprints or the guidelines that you can find online in terms of, what are the basics that I should maybe think about. But it is recommended that you try to get an IT professional to assist you a little bit with that. It is also possible that the broker or insurance provider may ask you, have you carried out a risk assessment, depending on your cybersecurity cover, and they may want to know And usually it's great to show by way of a journey that, you know, you started with, I don't know, 20 risks, and then you can show that you have a 5-year plan and you try to mitigate the risks over time, depending on impact and likelihood, you know, probability versus impact matrix. And then you try to whittle them down over time. And if you can show a plan, you know, like this year I'm phasing out USB sticks, you know, next year I'm trying to bring in bring your own device to the office policy and things like this, then you have tangible results, and it can show that you are trying to mitigate some of the risks in case you do get under fire from an insurance or other
Sure.
other area.
Yeah, and borrowing sort of language from the health and safety, sort of health and safety statements that be safe, be aware, and the fact that you haven't even done an assessment of a health and safety environment is worse than having done one badly. Doing one badly is obviously not the best, but the fact that you haven't even done it, it doesn't matter that you haven't completed any of the tasks, but having done it, then you're at least you're aware, and that to be able to
your first step on the road, you know, towards getting better. So at least there is awareness, like you say, there's awareness preparation, at least that you've done something, you know, might not be perfect, but at least you've done something.
So a lot of that was covered in potential threats, which was in August and September in the article. And then we moved on to more head in the sand type territory. You've been attacked. You've taken all of the precautions. You've taken everything we've said up to now, but it still has happened. And so do you want to talk about the different types of breaches that are possible, like the cybersecurity breaches, personal data breaches, etc.?
Yeah. So at a very high level, cybersecurity breaches are not necessarily personal data breaches. And people sometimes get them confused because, of course, if you have a breach, you know, which is defined as an unlawful or unauthorized access or use or being made public of certain information, then usually it involves personal data, but it doesn't always necessarily do that. A breach can also occur even though the information has not necessarily been accessed outside, but you could have a bad actor within your system controlling it, and you can no longer access the personal data or the information in question. So that could then be an internal breach, but nevertheless, it's still a breach because it is basically out of your reach and you no longer control it in a safe and secure manner. So there is nuances to that. And basically, Article 4 was trying to remind colleagues or people in this area that there is no harm consulting other colleagues who do this on a day-to-day basis. The cybersecurity breach can occur without being a loss of personal data, because it may just freeze the system or freeze certain areas like your maps, your financial reports that don't contain personal data, but it's still your information. And different types of breaches have different notification requirements under the law. So it is important to know which type of breach you're working with.
And not to put you in a difficult spot, but I know the Law Society asks on the cybersecurity page, which I'll put up now in a second, ask for people to inform them if they have been attacked, so that we can sort of build a bit of a knowledge base on.
Yes, and in fairness, I know that people may be hesitant about wanting to self-report, but the key towards this is that it can actually be an anonymous feature. So, you know, you don't have to say who you are, and it is important that you cover both successful but also unsuccessful or suspected attacks. Because the unsuspected attacks are obviously wonderful in the sense that nothing happened, but if you do report it, then you allow the Law Society to tell all of the other members that, hey, this has come to our attention, this is currently doing the rounds, please beware, so that you can protect one of your colleagues. So it is a bit of an internal alert system, and the Law Society is very clear that this is anonymous, and it's literally for the benefit of raising awareness and making sure everybody is as informed as possible.
And one of the other things you were just made a comment on, which caught my attention, was it's 5 years since GDPR. What was the point you were sort of making there?
Well, we have evolved in terms of the GDPR, in terms of understanding how the Data Protection Commission deals with these type of incidents, and the volume of data breach attempts is supposed to increase year on year. And so this is one thing that we should be aware of. I don't want to scaremonger or, you know, frighten people today, but this is definitely on the increase. And my personal experience is that if you have shown that you have remedied things and you have put in reasonable preventions, then, you know, human error can happen. It doesn't necessarily and automatically mean that the Data Protection Commission is going to come on top of you like a ton of bricks. So this is where, depending on the circumstances, I would very much advise go and seek a fellow colleague in the profession who does this on a day-to-day basis, and get their advice in terms of how you report to the relevant authorities. What do you include in your report? What timeline do you include? How do you then engage an IT professional to assist with some of the breach remediations on an IT level? Maybe you need to stop leaks, and then how do you notify the affected data subjects if they are personal data involved? Yeah. So it is on the increase. We've seen it over the last few years, but we've also seen in the last few years that the Data Protection Commission is not unreasonable.
And I suppose as part of that, and practitioners may be wondering, where do I sit with PII, professional indemnity insurance, and my application coming up now? And like, I don't have a risk assessment in place, and I don't have a contingency plan in place. Should I proceed as is, or should I remedy or change my actions now and do a bit of a risk assessment, knowing that it won't show a huge amount? Like, what's your advice there?
My advice is, I mean, this is also what, in terms of what the professional was saying that we were interviewing in relation to this, by way of, you know, Claire was a cyber insurance specialist. She basically just said, look, please engage with us, right? So when you're looking for the quote, have a conversation with us, frank and honest conversation in terms of how is your setup. In my experience, from what I heard on the ground, is that a risk insurance, a risk assessment for the insurance application is always a good idea, because then they know that you are thinking about it. So to go back to our earlier point is, better to think about it and have rules in place and some sort of a plan in place than, you know, be blind. And then it feels as if the blind are leading the blind, and your practice is walking into a disaster zone. So that's not something that they would like to see. The only one thing is that, of course, if you're establishing a plan, you need to progress it. So if you put your cards on the table, you know, then you play them. So this is something you have to bear in mind in terms of maybe the planning for next year and then the year thereafter, and how do you progress this piece.
And I know there is a requirement of the PII application to have a business plan submitted with, and I think this very easily could take up 1 or 2 pages of the business plan. There could be a reference to
depending on the provider and exactly what details they want. But yes, be prepared for this. So yeah, and I think the next article, very quickly, just before we go to Q&A, the next article, which is currently being drafted and it's not quite finalized, relates to safe online banking. So depending on your conversations with your professional insurance broker, it may help if you also explain to them, look, you know, we are putting in place internal rules in terms of, you know, 2 pairs of eyes or certain types of double checks that we do internally. Because one thing, and this is where again the notification system is so useful. We've had case studies where, like I said, by way of earlier, your email address could have been forged to, you know, Just and Add Law Society, as make the L into number 1. You then give me an instruction. I'm your bookkeeper. You give me the instruction. I think that you are the principal. You know what you're doing. I follow the instruction, and of course, I don't necessarily double check your email address if I'm in a hurry or whatever. And then if you say to me it has to go to XYZ bank account, I don't question that. So some of these losses that have been incurred in client accounts have not occurred because somebody just blocked the client account or took money out, but because they have managed to fool internal stakeholders within the law firm by representing another stakeholder and then making it look as if the instructions were genuine.
Wow. So just, if anyone has a question for us, we'd love a question. So if anyone could ask us a question, it'd be great. Meanwhile, we'll just keep talking because we'd love a question anyway. That's all I'll say.
I probably shell-shocked the audience. So
yeah. Well, as part of that, I mean, just reading from your next article, and not to spoil it for everybody, but 60% of the top 20 law firms have reported in the Smith & Williamson report of 2021 that they received some type of cybersecurity attack. So this is out there, and we can't put our head in the sand any longer. You did bring up a very good point. So we've got human human error and we've got training. And then the third one I really liked was 2 pairs of eyes. Do you want to just talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in terms of the 2 pairs of eyes, I think it helps to, for example, if you have, and this is one principle of Irish banking, if you put in an IBAN number and you put in the name. So, for example, Justin, if you say to me, I should send you, X amount as part of a conveyance, the issue is that the Irish banks won't check the accuracy of the IBAN number vis-a-vis the recipient's name. So as a result of this, when you check the IBAN or when you input the IBAN number, it may be a recommended habit to make sure that, new payees, you have 2 pairs of eyes on them so that, basically 2 people check the inputting of that number. And that may be also then raise internal questions. Where did you actually get the IBAN number from? Was it an email? Did you double check the email address? Did you maybe verify the authenticity of that email by ringing the sender and double checking through a second channel of communication that email is actually genuine?
So Bill is just making a comment there about the standard PII cover only covers loss of clients' funds, not the practitioner's losses. You need dedicated cyber policy for that. Brokers will advise. So that's Bill Holland from SE of the chair.
That's a very valid point. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you.
I think for some people are having problems with the links there. I'll try and put them back up. If you still want to get them, you can also email me, jpurcell@lawsociety. Is there any advice in relation to the risk of AI impersonating the voice of a person when telephoning to confirm bank details before transferring funds? I just want to make one point just very quickly. If you're relying on the bank to check the details, which is the point you're making, if you're relying in any way on the bank to try and figure out whether this is, I think that's not where the problem can be fixed or the solution is. There may, yes.
I mean,
just be cautious about putting your faith in the bank.
But that's exactly the point, right? The point is that your details, as you input it, need to be correct, because if something is wrong, then, the banks won't take responsibility because you inputted them. And in terms of impersonating the voice of a person when telephoning, this is exactly the point. So if you receive an email and you do not realize that it is fraudulent, best practice is, of course, that you do not use the telephone number that is contained in that very email to double check. So Justin, by way of an example, you asking me, Tanya, can you please transfer 20,000 to XYZ? You send it from Justin at 1aw@society.ie, rather than lawsociety.ie. I look at your email. I don't realize that you are a fraudster. I take down the new bank details, but then rather than ringing the number you've given in your email, I actually ring you on, I don't know, the mobile phone that I've already saved your email in, your telephone number in, because we just had a conversation yesterday. So I ring you from my mobile phone, or I send you a text message from my mobile phone, which is completely disconnected to the email. And even if I don't notice that the 2 telephone numbers are different, chances are that if the telephone number and the email is fraudulent, I will catch it this way, because then I will call you on a telephone number that I know has already worked in the past, and I can ring you and say, hey, I just received your email. What's the story with the chain of bank account details? Or I can verify them. And then
which goes back to the main theme of everything we've said so far, is if it doesn't feel right, it's probably worth a second check or second look. It's not right.
Correct. And that's also how you will then avoid, to go back to the question, this is then how you can avoid the risk of AI impersonations, because you can basically just say, well, look, it's unlikely that you will be an AI person if I ring you on a number that I spoke to you yesterday on. And if you get a call rather than make a call, then, if you don't feel that is right, hang up and then just ring him again on another line.
Yeah. Like I got a call yesterday from somebody saying I was part of a crypto scheme back in whatever, totally not true. And that for me was the end of the call. Block the number, end of it. If they really need to get me on it, they'll find another way to get me. But yeah, I think you need to be a bit ruthless on it. Listen, we're coming up to 1:30. So I mean, the final one of part of that article, which is probably the one I would like everyone to read about, is the management of the client account and training staff and how to deal with that. Do you want to just give a little bit of a synopsis of that, or do you want to leave it for another day?
I don't know. I might have to leave it for another day because it hasn't been completely approved yet.
Yeah. Okay.
But I should say, I think, you know, what we were talking about in terms of the two pairs of eyes and then the two different communication channels, I think that is the key. And also building reasonable expectations of the client. So when you meet the client first, get them to write you down the IBAN number on a different piece of paper so that you know, and sign it so that you have that on the file, and you scan it, and then build reasonable expectation of the client, how either bank details can be changed, yours or the client's. You know, it will always be over two channels of communication. It will never happen on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock when everybody's in a rush, and things like this. And you can also say, well, look, if we have emails, you know, perhaps we can find a way of encrypting the relevant details, or we send it only by letter, or things like this, or. So there are ways of doing things like this that can help to safeguard those type of instructions to make sure they're genuine.
I was trying to just move my slide on there, but it doesn't. It seems to have stuck. Just for there we go for next week's session. So next week we're going to be talking to Suzanne Dayton. Where are my clients' title deeds? On the 1st of November, applying for PII, as we've just discussed. There's 2 sessions on that, and then Martin Lawler on the AML on the 15th of November. Listen, just a big thanks to Tanya Moeller for pulling together this session today. Just to highlight that there are 4 or 5 articles available on the Gazette in the Gazette magazine coming from June. So June, July, August, September, and there's one just come out in October
and November, exactly. And then also, of course, the committee is here, right? So if members have questions, the technology committee is here to assist you. So, you know, please don't be shy, and please help report anonymously for the benefit of the entire profession. That's really important.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, you can come directly to me, j.purcell@lawsociety.ie, and I can forward you on to where you need to go to. So listen, thanks again, Tanya, Vice Chair of the Technology Committee. Thanks for a very informative session. Thanks, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Slán agus gur mágad.
Thank you. Bye-bye.